guys. I'm going to talk today about the principles of art and specifically balance. But what are the principles of art? The principles of art are the guidelines of how to arrange the elements of art in the artwork. So think of the principles of art as the frame that the elements of art go inside. There are 10 principles of art. They are the balance, movement, emphasis, rhythm, unity, harmony, variety, scale, pattern, and proportion. Let's talk about balance. Balance is the distribution of the visual weight in a painting. And it is to ensure that one side doesn't feel heavier than the other side. So think of balance like a teeter-totter. So if you're familiar with a teeter-totter, when we were children, it was out on a playground. You had the heavier child on one side and the lighter child on the other side, and it would go like this. You can also think of a scale, balancing scale, where they put gold on one side and heavier stuff to weigh that gold back in the 1800s. Hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. So think of a teeter-totter for the balance. And why is balance important? Balance sets the mood for the viewer. So your painting can be calm and restful. So it can be subtle and even weight across the artwork. So if you have even weight across the artwork, that makes it kind of calm and subtle and restful. But if the balance has movement and a lot of dynamic and contrast, that makes it joyful and lively. So depending on how you do your balance is what you convey to the viewer. So while balance can enhance a painting, not every work requires it. There is also intentional imbalance, and that can be very powerful. So there are 3 types of balance, and I like to remember them as SAR. You have symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial balance. Now, symmetrical balance is defined as like a mirror image or almost the same. So for instance, you have like a watermelon and a muskmelon. Now that's not exactly the same, but as long as they're the same size, they balance each other out. So that's symmetrical. So they're equal or nearly equal weight on both sides. Now for the mood that you set, it's order and stability and formality and solemnity. I blow that word every time. And common uses are architecture, portraits, and religious art. So for example, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. And a perfect example of symmetrical balance with figures evenly arranged around Christ in the center. And that is the most famous example is The Last Supper. Now for a pet portrait, you can have on a head-on portrait of a dog or a cat. You can have it evenly centered right in the center of your picture plane, and that will create symmetry. Now you can also have asymmetrical balance, which it's unequal. Its definition is it's unequal, but it's still visually balanced. So for instance, you have a watermelon on that teeter-totter, and you have a lot of little apples. Now those apples, of course, aren't the same size as this watermelon, but they weigh, so they balance. But there are a lot of little tiny things. So this large thing has more importance than all of these little things. Now, this is a more natural and casual, but can be more dynamic. It's used in landscapes, modern art, and still lifes. Again, Vincent van Gogh did a very famous painting, The Starry Night, where it balances with the large cypress tree on the one side and the moon and the stars on the right. And for a portrait example, you could use a large dog on one side to balance and maybe a small cat or a bird on the other side. Would create a visually engaging story, perhaps. And now for radial balance. Radial balance is where all of the elements are radiating from the central point. No, these are like your zentangles, your cathedral ceilings, your mandalas, florals, your flowers, your sunflowers. A lot create that radial balance. So the mood for radial is informal, dynamic, and lively. So for pet portraits, how would you do radial balance? You could have a cat surrounded by flowers or leaves arranged in a circular pattern. How elements of art influence balance. So you have the elements of art, the line, color, shape, texture, and size all affect the visual weight. That's how the visual weight is distributed. So your line, your thick line, and you know all of these intuitively, you know this. Your thick line has more visual weight than a thin line. You take this. This is a thin, and it has less weight than this. This is a thick line versus a thin line. So who has more weight? Visually, this one is drawing your line, your focus more than this one. Your solid line has more visual weight than a blurred line. Color, your values, your dark has more visual weight than your light colors. Your hues, now what is a hue? A hue is the family name, the red, yellow, orange, blue is a hue. So you have your warm hue, which is your red, yellow, and orange. And it carries more visual weight than your cool hues, which are your blues, your greens, and your purples. And then you have your saturations, your bright colors have more visual weight than your dull colors. Opaques, your opaque meaning you can't see through them. They have more visual weight than your transparent ones that you see through. And for size, you have big, has more visual weight than small. Now these all make sense, right? So a large object has more balance, can be balanced by a bunch of smaller objects. Just like you have on your teeter-totter, you have a large watermelon and you have a bunch of little oranges. And you put as many oranges as you need to balance how much weight you need to balance this watermelon. You just keep on adding oranges until until the teeter-totter balances out. So that's how size balances out And the large objects can be balanced by this multiple smaller objects. And your shape, if you have complex shapes, like your hexagons and your tetragons, they have more balance, have more weight than your simple shapes, like your ovals and your circles and your squares. And your sharp angles have more weight than your soft curves. And your textured areas have more weight than your smooth areas. So placements, how you place your objects on the picture plane. The objects near the edges have more weight than the objects in the center. So your eye gets pulled to the edge of the picture plane more so than objects that are placed in the center. So don't place a big object towards the edge. So foreground elements have more weight than background elements. So the viewer's eyes are drawn more towards the foreground than the background. So for pet portraits, how does this apply for pet portraits? So a large dog's face in the foreground has dark fur and sharp features, but it can be balanced out by a softer, lighter colored background, such as perhaps having a blurred field or sky. And animal eyes, they're usually very detailed and dark, and they can anchor a composition, but they can balance it by having lighter fur and soft edges. A lot of times we emphasize the eyes, and then we put a really nice little highlight right next to the darkness of the pupil. We emphasize the nose, and then we blur out the body fur. So all of the emphasis is on the face. And that really creates a very striking portrait. So final thoughts. Balance is more than just making sure that the painting doesn't tip over. It's about creating harmony visually or tension. You want to evoke emotions and you want to tell a story. Whether your painting is about a playful pup or it's a sleeping cat, you want to tell the story. It's all about the story. You want to involve the viewer. You want to keep them involved. You want to get them to just focus on the painting, to be drawn into your painting. And the way that you arrange your elements can make your artwork feel grounded, exciting, and or dynamic. So the next time you pick up your paintbrush, think about how you can use balance to highlight your pet's personality and create a visually stunning piece of art. Happy painting.